Hello, and thank you so much for tuning in. This is Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Bregman of the Jewish Executive Learning Network. You're listening to J-Root Radio in Brooklyn and beyond. Thank you so much for checking out tonight's program. This is our weekly class in the Parsha that I have the privilege and merit of sharing together with you. Our show is called Short and Sweet on the Parsha. It's because the Divrei Torah that I share over are relatively short, hopefully very sweet, and they're based upon the Sefer, the new Torah work by that very name, which I had the merit of authoring, called Short and Sweet on the Parsha, which you can get at Amazon.com, Feldheim, Judaica stores, and everywhere else. Looking forward to learning with you. This week's Parsha, we're going to be starting a new book of the Torah, the fourth book of the Torah of the Chumash, Sefer Bamidbar, the book of Bamidbar. And that's where we're up to in the Torah, the book of Bamidbar. If you'd like to get in touch with me in the week ahead, be my privilege. You can simply send me an email, director@JELN, which stands for Jewish Executive Learning Network, director@JELN.org. Happy to correspond with you in terms of the learning for tonight, in terms of my wife and I are involved in shidduchim, if you think we could be of any benefit to you in that capacity, or anything else. We always are open to feedback, and thank you for being here with us. So let's get started on the book of Bamidbar. So if you begin the Parsha, this week's Torah portion, you'll see that in the book of Bamidbar, it starts out with a census of the Jewish people taking place. It says, take a census of the entire assembly of the children of Israel. That's a book of Bamidbar, chapter 1, verse 2. Now the question is, why does Sefer Bamidbar, the book of Bamidbar, begin with a census? Why is that? So Rav Shamshin Raphael Hirsch suggests that a census, that's a very, very natural, appropriate connector to the book of Vayikra, the book of Leviticus, which we just concluded with last week's Torah readings, Behar and Bechukaisai. Why is that? So at the very end of last week's Parsha, last week's Torah portion, we read about a mitzvah pertaining to the flock. That's right, the flock of the animals. It said over there in the book of Vayikra, chapter 27, verse 32, it says, any tithe of cattle or of the flock, and any that passes under the staff, the 10th one is going to be kadosh, it's going to be holy to Hashem. So says Rav Hirsch, since the book of Vayikra concludes with a counting of the flock, therefore Sefer Bamidbar begins with a counting of Hashem's flock, more flock, and Hashem's flock is the Jewish people. How do I know that the Jewish people are considered to be God's flock? Well, it's not my opinion. If you look in the book of Psalms, the book of Tehillim, chapter 100, verse 3, David HaMelech, King David himself, called the Jewish people Hashem's flock. So it says Rav Hirsch, why does this book of the Torah begin with a census? Nothing else? A census of the flock, specifically a census. And the answer is because last week had to do with a flock, so we continue with a flock. So now that explanation of Rav Hirsch fits very nicely with the statement of Rashi. Rashi suggests that the reason you find a census taking place several times in the Torah is because we are precious to Hashem. It's only because we are dear to Him that He counts us frequently. And it's also interesting, many sources actually explain that the regular censuses that you're going to find in the Torah, they're understood in light of a certain Gemara. The Talmud says in Tractate Baba Metzia, Chaf Aleph Amud Beis 21b, the Talmud says over there that it's common for a person to be in the habit of touching their pockets all the time. Why do people do that? Well, it's not a new habit. It's an old one, and that is to make sure that your money is secure. Even if a person has every reason to believe that his contents are still there in his pocket, he still touches them, or he taps his wallet again and again. Why? That's because his money is very much on his mind. So the person wants to make double sure and triple sure that everything is where it's supposed to be, and everything's fine and everything's in order. Because you know how it is. You can't be too careful with pickpockets. I was flying yesterday. I was flying somewhere in the Midwest, back from the Midwest on a business trip back over here to the East Coast. And you know how it is, you go through the airport, and with security and everything else, and all the people and all the lines, TSA, you can lose things. So you put away your phone, take out your phone, put away your license, take out your license, put away your wallet, take out your wallet, put on your watch, take off your watch. You know the drill, right? So what happens is, I'm going through the airport yesterday, you keep touching your pocket, your front pocket, your side wallet, your pocket where your wallet is, whatever it is. My point is, you're touching these things to make sure your contents are still there because they're on your mind, and so you give a tap. So this is what the Talmud is talking about. So say some of the commentaries, it's for this reason you find that Hashem counts the Jewish people regularly in the Torah. That's why you find the census taking place a bunch of times, because even though God knows perfectly well where we are, Hashem knows where we are, He touches us, so to speak, and He's going to count us regularly because we are upmost on His mind, and the Jewish people are precious to Him. So we're on God's mind, so to speak. So as the Talmud says, something's on your mind, you give it a tap just to make sure it's where you think it's going to be. Okay, so far so good. Okay, now I'm going to share with you a different insight, which is a pretty popular Devar Torah that it's one of the most popular ones from my new Sefer, short and sweet, on the Parsha. So here we go. So the Chiddushei Harim, who was the first Ger Rebbe, he offers an alternative explanation as to why you find the Yidden being counted again and again in the Torah. Now, in order to understand his approach, you first need to have a little bit of familiarity with halacha, with Jewish law. Okay, so here we go. Now, have you ever wondered what would be the kosher status, the kasher status, of a pot of chicken soup if some milk would spill into it? What would happen? You have some chicken soup, some milk falls in. Is the soup no good now, and now it's meat and milk? What's the story? So the answer is that it is determined by the halachas of something called bittul. Bittul means nullification. Now, just kicked something over here in my little radio studio. Hope you didn't hear the noise on air. So the answer is it's determined by the halachas of bittul, nullification. Now, if you know Jewish law, the halacha of bittul could be complicated, and there's different percentages and ratios that serve as the thresholds for this and that, and they vary by circumstance. But basically, the simple concept at play is that sometimes a minority item can be subsumed by a larger majority item. That's what bittul is. That's the concept. It's found in the Torah. It's found in Shulchan Aruch. That's the idea in Yeridea. Basically, the way bittul works is a minority item can sometimes be subsumed and basically become nullified by a larger item. How much, the percentage, what ratio? It depends. It varies according to the thing. But that's bittul. So in this instance, remember I just gave you an example of the milk falling into the chicken soup? If the ratio of chicken soup to milk would be large enough, as the Jewish law, as the halacha would require, it could be that the soup might still be kosher. If the milk was small enough, the droplet, and the amount and the volume of the remaining soup was big enough. Okay, fine. Now, that's bittul. But there's a little bit of a lesser known explanation you have to know, an exception to this halacha. And here we go. If the forbidden item, the one that, let's say the milk falling into the soup, if it is something that is generally counted or sold by unit, then the principle of bittul, of nullification, does not apply. I'll say that again. If the item that's falling in is the kind that's generally something that you count or you sell by unit, then bittul, nullification, doesn't apply. So again, if milk would fall into chicken soup, is milk, do you buy milk by the droplets? No. Do you buy milk by the units? 1 droplet of milk, 2 droplets of milk. No, that's not how it works. So, therefore, bittul could apply. If it's in the right ratio, the milk could be canceled out. But there are other items that are sold by the unit or counted. So if you buy eggs usually come in a dozen, right? I don't know if maybe there's a different box you could buy at Costco, but most eggs come as a dozen. So you go buy your eggs, and that's something that's counted or sold in kind of in a unit. Or what about cheese sticks? My kids love these cheese sticks, and to be honest with you, their father does too. It's called a string cheese, but I call it a cheese stick. Anyway, those are sold by unit, for example, a certain number to a bag. So if that would not be kosher, or dairy falling into milk, the halachas bittul wouldn't apply according to that exception. Okay, so what does this all have to do with our Parsha? This is a very nice kosher lesson, and I hope you find it interesting. But why am I talking about all of this over here, and what does this have to do with the Jewish people being counted in the book of Bamidbar, the book of Numbers in the Torah, and counted again and again, and all of this? So the Chidushei Harim, the Ger Rebbe, he says like this. He says, since Klal Yisrael is from the tiniest of minorities in the world, which is true, the Jewish people are so small in number. Since we're so small in number, it carries the potential that we could, chas v'shalom, we could, God forbid, be swallowed up by the majorities of the people in the world who are not Jewish or have different belief systems or different values and everything else. So it's, that could happen. The Jewish people are less than 1/2 of 1% of the population of the world. I think right now it's about 1/4 of 1% of the population of the world is Jewish. So it's very easy for that 1/4 of 1% to be swallowed up by the majority, which is people who are not Jewish in the world. Okay. So to counteract this danger, says the Chidushei Harim, Hashem counts the Jewish people often. What's the point? So since Hashem counts us often, that would give us the status of being something that is regularly counted. And therefore, since we ourselves are regularly counted, it enables us to resist the application of the halachas of bittul, of nullification, to our status in this world. Pretty cool idea. So by counting us on a regular basis, Hashem has halachically ensured that we will always remain distinct and important, and even if we're mixed amongst the nations of the world, we will never be consumed by that majority, which is a pretty neat idea. Now, to all of that, Ad Kan the Chidushei Harim, up to there is what the Ger Rebbe had to say. I'd add my own ha'ara, my own observation. We find in the Torah that Hashem counts the Jewish people 3 times. Counts us 3 times. You could see in the Chumash, in the book of Shmais, in Perek 12, in chapter 12, you see that Hashem counts us when we left Mitzrayim. He counts us after Chet Egel, after the sin of the golden calf. And then again here in our Parsha, counts us 3 times. So the question is, why 3 times? So I would suggest to you, it has to do with the halachic concept of chazaka. What's chazaka? Chazaka is a general principle that states that once an occurrence has happened 3 times, it now has a certain established permanence. The Gemara speaks about this in Baba Metzia on page 106b in the Talmud. So therefore, I want to suggest that it's possible that Hashem counts us 3 times in the Torah, the Jewish people, in order to make a chazaka, to halachically establish Klal Yisrael as an entity which is officially counted and thus incapable of nullification. Very, very, very nice ideas. Okay, let's keep going in the Parsha. The next shtickle Torah, the next piece that I'd like to share over with you, I call it a 20-year-old begins pursuit. And that is found on page 339 in the Sefer in the work, short and sweet on the Parsha. So let's give it a go. So if you're following inside the Chumash, inside your book of the Torah, we're in the book of Bamidbar, chapter 1, verse 3. The verse says, from 20 years of age and up, everyone who goes out to the legion in Israel. Now, this pasuk says that a 20-year-old goes out to war. That's what the verse says. 20 years of age and up, everyone who's yoytzet to the tzava goes out to war. 20 years and up, go out to war. So the Imrei Emes, the third Ger Rebbe, he writes that homiletically speaking, this verse about a 20-year-old going out to war refers to the idea that a 20-year-old must be ready to go out to war against his Yetzer Hara, his evil inclination. Now, where does the Ger Rebbe get that from? So he bases this on the book of Pirkei Avos, chapter 5, Mishnah 25, which says that a 20-year-old begins pursuit. Yeah, a 20-year-old begins pursuit. Here it says that 20 goes out to war. So many Mefarshim understand the Mishnah over there in Avos to be dealing with the age at which a young man should go out to begin to work and pursue a livelihood. They understand that is the pursuit that the Mishnah is talking about. But Rashi and many others say that the pursuit referenced here is referring to the point in time at which the Beis Din Shalmaila, the heavenly tribunal, pursues a person for his sins that he might have done and begins to dole out punishment to the person. So there we go. So since the individual is now going to be open to punishments, you can rest assured that the Yetzer Hara, his evil inclination, is going to do everything in his power to seize the opportunity to challenge this person mightily. Okay, so that's how Rashi understands that Mishnah. Now, the Chassam Sofer in Parshas Chayei, he concurs, he agrees with the idea that we just said, and he writes that it is true that the period between the age of 20 and 30, that is the most intense period of Yetzer Hara, of evil inclination in a person's life. So therefore, he says that the milestone of an individual's 20th birthday, it therefore has to become a powerful counterattack time against the Yetzer Hara. You hear? A lot of people, they turn 20 and they think it's time to just go have fun. So Chassam Sofer writes in Parshas Chayei, and he writes in Chassam Sofer Al Torah, he says, no, you think age 20 is for games? Well, he doesn't write that part, but he says that age 20, you have that birthday, that's time to get down to business, and your fight against your Yetzer Hara, against your evil inclination, because 20 to 30 is the number one chief time you're going to be tested. And he says that, you hit the age of 20, it's time for a young Jewish man to wage a spiritual war, like the verse says in our verse about going out to war at age 20 against your evil inclination, which is exactly what the Imrei Emes had explained. So what do you see from here? It's a mistake to assume that once a person passes those infamous teenage years, that life is somehow going to become less turbulent. It's not really true. To the contrary, the young adult has to be prepared, because that young adult, when he finishes his teenage years and he hits 20, he's about to feel the full brunt of the Yetzer Hara and its blandishments, trying to farchap him, we say in Yiddish, to suck him in to sin. So therefore, a person would do well to redouble and reinforce his commitment to Limud Torah, to Limud Musar, and all other forms of personal shmira and guarding yourself in that crucial decade of 20 to 30. You can also conclude from these sources that a Yid, a Jew between the age of 20 and 30, who has no connection to Torah, that person, that Jew, would be in an especially precarious position. Why? Because the Gemara says in Kedushin, Daf Lamed Amud Beis, that Torah is the number one antidote to weaken the Yetzer Hara you feel inside of you. And if you have no shaykhis with Torah, you have no connection to Torah, and you hit your 20th birthday, that's a precarious position to be in. In some ways, that is probably akin to a soldier being sent out to the front lines, but the person doesn't have his weapon, so he can go into the battle armed. So anyway, that's some nice ideas that some of the commentaries say connected to this theme that a 20-year-old goes out to war, which we find in the beginning of this week's Parsha, Parshas Bamidbar. Okay, you're listening to Short and Sweet on the Parsha on J-Root Radio. This is Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Bregman, the Jewish Executive Learning Network. Let's keep going. Some tremendous Torah as we're saying over tonight. We're in the book of Bamidbar now, chapter 2, verse 2. So the pasuk says that the children of Israel shall encamp, each man by his banner, according to the insignia of their father's household, at a distance surrounding the tent of meeting shall they encamp. Okay, that's what we got. No problem, so far so good. Now, so the next section of our parsha is going to deal with something called the Degalim. Now, what's Degalim? This is called the Parsha of Degalim. The Torah is going to spend 34 psukim explaining the exact formation in which the Shvatim, the Jewish tribes, were positioned around the Mishkan. And it's also going to talk about the banners they had, the flags of the tribes, and things like that. Now, at first blush, this seems to be an astonishing amount of space to devote to the topic. Why is it so important? That's a question, because at the end over here of this passage, in chapter 2, verse 34, the passage ends with a statement. It says, the children of Israel did everything that Hashem had commanded Moshe, so they encamped according to their banners, etc. So the question you might ask is, couldn't this pasuk over here, chapter 2, 34, which says the Jewish people did what God said, and they encamped according to their banners like they were supposed to, couldn't that verse have been enough in the Chumash, in the Torah Shebachsav, in the written Torah, to alert us to this topic? And then the rest of the details on this topic, which tribe was where and all the details, couldn't that have been placed somewhere in the Torah Shebal Peh, in the oral Torah, maybe in the Medrash Rabbah, maybe in the Yalkut Shemaini, somewhere else might have seemed appropriate. That's often how the Torah works. You'll have one pasuk, a general pasuk, that tells us and alerts us to a topic, and then somewhere buried, so to speak, in the Medrash, you'll find all the pratim and the pratim, the details and the details of the details, all buried there. So why did why did Hashem see fit to take up 34 psukim in his Torah on this topic? So Rav Aaron Kotler Zatzal suggests the following answer. He says like this. He says, even the most worthwhile and holy things in the world can be ruined or spoiled through disorder. And he says this even applies to the Shiftei Ka, the tribes of Israel, who had recently left Egypt, received the Torah at Mount Sinai, and were on their way to Eretz Yisrael. All of that Kedusha could have met with ruination were it not for the fact that Seder, which means order, was maintained. And he's referring to the Seder of all the tribes and how they were organized and the like. And, every aspect, he says, of a person's life needs order. You have to have a time devoted for learning and a time for davening, a time for review of your Torah studies, a time for your relationships, a time for work, and a time for everything. And the time for one, Rav Aaron says, it's not supposed to impinge upon and bleed into the time for others. And if you look at the 4-volume Mishnahs Rav Aaron, this is a theme you see in the Shmuzin that he says a lot. To emphasize this point now forcefully, the Torah Shebachsav, the written Torah, devotes a very significant amount of space and ink to the Degalim. So what do I want to say over here? What I want to say over here is that Rav Aaron's thesis, it's a real call regarding the need for orderliness in our pursuit of everything in life, and especially in even holy things, holy endeavors. It's not like your business is supposed to be in order, but your connection to your Creator, that's supposed to be a mess. No. That's not the case. And not only are we supposed to have Seder in our pursuit of Kedusha, of sanctity, some want to suggest that theme actually provides us an explanation for a pretty interesting anomaly. The question is, why is Parsha Bamidbar, this week's Torah portion, invariably read on a Shabbos that closely precedes Shavuos? And that's what you're going to find this year. This year, the Hebrew year is 5775, and this year, the Parsha, the Torah portion of the week is Bamidbar, as we know. And we're going to read that in Shul on Shabbos morning, on Saturday morning. And already from Saturday night begins the Yontif of Shavuos, the holiday of Shavuot, of Matan Torah. So why is Bamidbar always read pretty much, almost invariably, in a Shabbos right before Shavuot when we get the Torah? So the answer may be that this Parsha comes right before Matan Torah to give over the idea that if you truly wish to acquire and retain Torah wisdom, you got to be organized with your time, your learning, your review, and all aspects of life. Because one of the themes of this week's Parsha is Seder. And I would tell you even a little bit more. To put it bluntly, I have never met a massive Talmid Chacham, a massive Torah scholar, whose mind, learning schedule, or personal affairs were in gross disarray and in chaos. And I would even tell you a little bit more. In fact, my experience has been quite to the contrary. I also believe that there are tremendous brachas, tremendous blessings in life awaiting a person who keeps his affairs, spiritual and otherwise, in an orderly fashion. You know who speaks about this? David HaMelech. In the book of Psalms, in Psalm 50, verse 23, in line 23, David HaMelech, he says, one who orders his way, I will show him the salvation of God. So it's interesting, isn't it a coincidence that people who are organized, they generally, quote unquote, happen to find that Hashem seems to help them more than people who aren't, Is it that they're lucky? Is it that they happen to merit miracles? Well, the verse is telling you pretty straight in Tehillim, if you order your way, that David HaMelech says, King David says, you will be shown the salvation of God. So it's not that organized people happen to get lucky. It's that God, according to the normal and natural order of the world, finds it to be an easier target to bless and assist if your life and your affairs and everything else happen to be in order. This is something that is a theme that I'll tell you in the last few remaining minutes we have. This is a theme that very, very much, for me, hits close to home. Being in order, having seder, having things organized in life, it's so critical, it's so crucial. I've seen amazing people with wonderful ideas, good heart, and everything else. I've seen their businesses collapse. I've seen their programs and organizations turn into a complete mess because they don't have order. This would apply to a rabbi. This would apply to a business person. This would apply to almost anyone. You have to have seder in life. And remember what the Parsha is saying, what Rabbi Aaron Kotler is saying in his ksavim, in his writings, and this, where he writes about this week's Torah portion, that even the Jewish nation that left Egypt had all those miracles, participated in the splitting of the Red Sea, got to Torah Mount Sinai, and were on their way to Eretz Yisrael, on their way to the land of Israel for the first time. All of that holiness and all of that potential could have been ruined if they didn't have seder, if they didn't have order. And this is why the theme of Degalim, this is why the theme of the flags and the order of the banners is such a big theme in our Torah portion, and why it inevitably takes up 34 verses, that God takes up that much, let's call it real estate, in His Torah for that theme. I hope you have enjoyed very, very much tonight's shiur, tonight's Torah class. My name is Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Bregman of the Jewish Executive Learning Network. You've been listening to the Short and Sweet on the Parsha program, which is based on the Short and Sweet on the Parsha Sefer, which you can access from Feldheim at feldheim.com, at just about every Judaica store, and Amazon.com. If you send me an email, director@jeln.org, I'll even help you get one too. I also want to thank J-Root Radio once again for their good-heartedness and friendship in giving me this chashuva forum, this prestigious platform with which to share Divrei Torah with the klal, with the community in Brooklyn and beyond. I thank you for being here with us. And God willing, with Hashem's help, next week's Parsha is Parshas Nasoi in the book of Bamidbar, the next Torah portion. And I hope to merit to have the blessing of being here with you. Meanwhile, I wish everyone an early good Shabbos and a beautiful Chag of Matan Torah, of Shavuot coming up on the other side of Shabbos as well. We'll see you the next time. Have a good night. Thank you for your time. Bye-bye.